Hi, I'm Dr. Janice Morrow. Thanks for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings, where we talk about the brain and all things related to mental health. Welcome. Jushu, thanks everybody for joining us. And our guest today is Jeremiah Gardner from the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. We're very excited he's here. And our topic today, we're going to be talking about substance use disorder, addiction, and recovery. So I'm going to let him discuss, give us a little bit of history about the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. And we're happy that you're tuned in. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Janice. It's great to be on the show with you. I told you before, and I'll say it again, American Mood Swings is just a great title. I think in the sort of times we're living in, we're experiencing as a society and a culture mood swings. And of course we do as human beings experience, we're all on a spectrum of feeling good, not feeling not so good, experiencing the ups and downs of life. So I just think it's a great title. It's catchy and it really resonates with, I think, our reality as people. So it's great to be here.
Thank you. Well, why don't you go ahead and just give us a little bit of history of the Betty Ford Foundation and how it became Hazelden Betty Ford, and yeah, a little bit about it, and then we'll talk about the different services and programs that are provided.
Sure. Well, I'm again Jeremiah Gardner. I am the director of communications and public affairs for the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. I'm sitting in my home office in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We are at Hazelden Betty Ford. That is a national nonprofit addiction and mental health care system. We also have a graduate school, a publishing division, and training and development division, and a research division. And we're very engaged in advocacy across the country. But we started in 1949, which is especially relevant because next year we'll celebrate 75 years of bringing hope and healing to people affected by substance use disorders. And the Hazelden Foundation was founded in 1949 in a little farmhouse in Minnesota, sort of on the heels of something called Alcoholics Anonymous getting founded and slowly spreading across the United States from the east to the west, and people for the first time, experiencing recovery in ways that they hadn't before. Prior to, and Hazelden's, the brainstorm around Hazelden is, well, what if we helped more people get introduced to this newfound miracle that's affecting many of us, and help people get away from their daily environment, introduce them to AA and the 12 steps. And so that was the original idea in 1949. It grew, and we ended up collaborating with a state hospital in Minnesota. What emerged over the course of the 50s and early 60s was something that came to be known as the Minnesota model of addiction treatment, which then spread around the world. It was a sort of a standardized way to approach addiction treatment that had never really existed prior. For most of our history prior to then, it was, either went to asylums or jail, and you were shunned. Certainly, healthcare wanted nothing to do with people who used alcohol or substances for most of our history.
Wow.
So that's sort of our humble beginnings. We were started by people affected by substance use disorders, and who really, in the amid neglect, decided to do something for themselves and for the community and population of people like them. And so that's how we started. And again, grew and sort of spread across the world. And Betty Ford, the first lady of the United States, President Gerald Ford's wife, after they left the White House in 1976, she went to treatment herself at a naval hospital in California for alcohol and prescription medication issues that she was having. And that was in 1978. And she was very public from the get-go. It's kind of remarkable. No one, this is something we've talked about in the shadows for, again, most of our history. And for whatever reason, she had the inclination to be open about it. Even when she was in treatment, she, put out statements to the New York Times
Isn't that something to have? Yeah, it's pretty groundbreaking. And
It is, and I guess she had some precedent for it. She was a very independent sort of minded person who had experienced breast cancer also, and had become really talked openly about her breast cancer, and really launched all the breast cancer awareness campaigns that we now are very commonplace today. So that was even before she was an advocate for recovery from substance use disorder. She was a breast cancer advocate, and so she had this independent streak. She was a dancer. She sometimes opposed her own husband's policies, and I think she was kind of ahead of her time in being that kind of a uh,
independent, for sure, way ahead of her time.
yeah. And so it wasn't out of character for her, but it was out of character for us, people affected by substance use disorders, for her to be so open. And of course, she was probably the most prominent person in American history who was vocal in that way about, hey, I experienced this, I got help, now I'm doing better. Um, it's okay to ask for help. Recovery is possible. And her openness and advocacy then led her to uh, make plans with another person who was ambassador and a U.S. ambassador to Belgium,
Oh,
Leonard Firestone, to start an addiction treatment center in the community where they lived, which is Rancho Mirage, or the Palm Springs area of California.
pretty
And
swanky swank out there.
that's a good vacation place, and it was sort of it's still a golf community, but um,
Well, it's warm. A lot of the older folks like to be warm, their little bones, right? You're coming from a cold climate. They just want to go somewhere warm like Florida or yeah, Palm Springs.
so that she had no intentions of having it be named after her. They talked her into that through the course of planning for it, and she sort of reluctantly accepted. I think she, on the one hand, didn't want the pressure of, okay, my name's on it, then I got, pressure on me to stay healthy,
Yeah,
one, and
yeah.
two, humility is such a core principle behind recovery and part of recovery, that putting your name on something like that, just feels uncomfortable. But she ultimately allowed it, and it moved forward in that way. And the Betty Ford Center was started in 1982, in October of 1982, so 41 years
So
ago.
let's talk about the program. What kind of services, and then I think we'd love to hear your story or how you got involved with this, if it's a personal thing for you, or if you just brought on board, or you have a history and how you were brought in. But I'd love to hear about some of the services and that Betty Ford, because yeah, it sounds like there were some novel things like gender specific treatment, the family program that were not done before. So let's hear all about the services.
Yeah, one important part of our history I didn't fail to get to, which is the Betty Ford Center was founded independent of the Hazelden Foundation.
Okay.
Betty Ford visited Hazelden in Minnesota to sort of uh, take our blueprint and make that be the foundation for her plan in Palm Springs. And also, our president at the time uh, recommended the person who became the president of the Betty Ford Center. So we had this close link, but became competitors. Hazelden and the Betty Ford Center were competitors from 1982 to 2014, but we had these friendly collaborative links all along, even despite being competitors, and we merged. So
Okay.
for now 9 years, next year will be the 10th anniversary of the two biggest names in addiction treatment merging together to form the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, which is the nonprofit that I represent here today. So um, lots of history that makes me feel good, and to be part of. Um,
Well, and such a rewarding kind of journey and career, I would think. So, from just doing a little research, it sounds like the model is a little different than most other models or that were out there. That they're combining four components. It's the biological, psychosocial, and spiritual, and that they were one. That the spiritual was just as important as the other. Having a spiritual, it doesn't necessarily have to be like any particular faith, but I'd love to hear about, yeah, some of how these things, these these philosophies were integrated in the various programs that are available when someone joins the Betty Ford or signs up, and that whole process.
Yeah, well, you're hitting on some core things that, really started back in the 50s and 60s, and, some of which carry through today, despite many more innovations since. But one of them, you're talking about the core elements of the Minnesota model as it came to be known, which is, one, we didn't lock the doors, so you weren't a prisoner.
Oh, oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's new information. I've never been to a rehab facility like
um,
this.
you alluded to the biopsychosocial spiritual model as we've referred to it, and it's addiction is a complex illness, and it's part of what makes it hard for people to understand and get their head around is that it has different facets. It manifests in different ways. Recovery manifests different ways, and it does have a biological component to it, a psychological, a social, and a spiritual component. And so, what that looks like in the end, what it ended up looking like was a multidisciplinary uh, care team. So you need medical care. There are withdrawal symptoms when you stop. There are um, medications that are helpful along the way. Good addiction care requires medical care. Psychological issues require good psychological care. So mental health care, and this is an increasing focus where I work at Hazelden Betty Ford, is really robust mental health care. Yeah, alongside substance use care, so co-occurring disorder care. The majority of the people we see, which tend to be a little more further down this, have more complex needs than maybe the average person with a mild substance use disorder, have co-occurring mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, trauma on their background, etc. So medical care for biological, mental health care for psychological. Um, it's a social issue too. You've probably heard in sort of the popular culture these days that the opposite of addiction is connection, and there's a lot of truth in that. That addiction is really rooted in isolation. People who, like myself, at one time, who uh, sort of head down the road of addiction, we begin to feel isolated from our families, from our communities, from our workplaces. We a lot of stuff that's happening to us stays inside, and that isolation can lead down lots of other roads, and it feeds on itself. And it's when we get connected and we, um, find community and realize that what we're experiencing is not unique to us. Um, and that was one of my when I went to treatment 17 years ago. This sounds a little silly now, but I remember a book that I encountered like on my first day, and it was called "Sick and Tired of Being." It's right here, actually. Wasn't planning this, but I don't know
Oh,
if you
okay.
can see it.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't really see it.
It's blurred out, but you could say the name. What's the
Yeah,
name of the book?
tired of being sick and tired. It's just a little book,
Okay.
but and that's sort of a cliche in recovery worlds that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But at the time, I didn't know any of the sayings, any of the wisdom, the folk wisdom that is helpful. And I was like, that's exactly how I feel. I feel sick and tired of being so sick and tired. And that was just the beginning of realizing that all the stuff that I was experiencing was not unique to me. And then I would hear other stories of people, and they were people from all different walks of life. They could be people coming right out of prison, or somebody like me working in a corporate environment at the time, or an athlete, or just all sorts of different people can experience this same health condition, just like all sorts of people can get cancer, all sorts of people can get diabetes or heart disease, all sorts of people can experience this. And that was a big aha. Uh, and part of what allowed, the community helped me understand that and see that, but also the support you get along the way, the sort of intimacy that you develop with a community of recovery around just being a human being and being vulnerable is really profound. And so, biological medical care, psychological mental health care, social community, peer support. And then the spiritual element is this is often debated, of course, because spirituality is sort of a can be a trigger word for people who've had experiences with church maybe that aren't good
Oh,
or help.
oh, I didn't even think about that, that it could be triggering. Okay.
Yeah, but in the recovery world that I'm a part of, that we talk about, it's not about religion. It's about a more generic spirituality, and people end up defining it and relating to it in however they want. But why is it a spiritual condition? Well, when you're in the midst of addiction, it's an existential crisis. I mean, it truly is a crisis of the spirit. You feel, and everybody's a little different, but there's shame, hopelessness, just frustration, fear, all these things that are really existential to, who am I? Why am I here? Can I survive this? What am I? Um, and and so you do have to address that spiritual crisis that people find themselves in. And also, I think by nurturing our spiritual condition, we protect ourselves against going back to use again. Use serves us in some way. It might make my insecurity feel, help me feel more confident amid insecurity. It may make it easier for me to socialize. It may relieve pain for me initially. It may just make me more comfortable in uncomfortable situations initially. But once you get to the point of being, uh, having a substance use disorder or a severe substance use disorder, um, you know that you can't turn to that for those solutions anymore. You have to have other solutions for those human things. And so, what the question becomes, what can I do in my life to protect myself from turning to those solutions again?
Hmm.
You know, popular called more popularly called relapse or returning to use. And I think the truth of the matter is that if you nurture your spiritual self, whatever that looks like, you are less likely to turn to those other um, short-term solutions that maybe in the back of your brain you have some memory of those working for you at one time.
Yes, it's been interesting to see and learn over just doing different interviews, how when people do relapse, it can be so much more stronger. That actor who passed away a few years ago, Philip Seymour Hoffman, they found him, I guess he had struggled with heroin and he had been clean though for many, many, many years. And then he just relapsed and there was quite a bit. And it was, but from talking to experts like yourself and in the field, it sounds like that's, it can happen. So let's talk about. We're going to focus on recovery, but do you want to outline the different kinds of programs? Or I'd love for people that aren't familiar with like what happens and what are the different programs. I think there's like inpatient, outpatient, and then continuing care. If we could just touch on those, if they're part of, yeah, and then also is this do people pay out of pocket? It's a nonprofit, or is it a sliding scale? If you can afford it, you pay for it, or free, and there's like a 10-year wait list. How does it? Yeah, I'd love to hear, but about the services that and the different programs. What one could expect. So they call up Betty Ford. They're ready to take charge and get involved, or what's the process like, and what's the 30-day stay going to be like, and what kind of services are available?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. There's a lot of mystery around addiction treatment, maybe because of the culture of just anonymity and privacy around the whole issue. Um, well, if you're to call today, you're going to, talk to a care navigator. They will do an initial assessment, and the act of getting care is sometimes a long one for families, right? It may be a spouse or a parent that actually makes the call, not the person directly. And it may be they call today, but then their loved ones, was ready like last night, but today they're not. And then they call back the next day. So it's a little bit of a messy process for a lot of people in real life. But once you're able to, get to the point where you have somebody who's, needs care, you do an initial assessment and you determine what's the proper level of care and what are the options. And so you're referring to, and there's a whole continuum. We provide the whole continuum services. The most intense level of care is residential, and then where you actually live with other people and you live amid your caregivers. The next level down is called day treatment or partial hospitalization, and this is kind of in the weed stuff that, just like when you go to for cancer care, not everybody understands all the different things that are necessarily happening. But the next level is, as I said, day treatment or partial hospitalization, which means you're going 5 days a week to get care and pretty much spending uh, uh, the whole day there, but you're not living there. So you're living somewhere else. That could be at home. It could be in a sober house. It could be in recovery residences that a treatment provider has. But it's a different level of care. And then the next level down is called intensive outpatient, and that's where you're typically going to an outpatient group for about 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. And then there's outpatient, so not intensive outpatient, but outpatient, which is the same but just fewer days or a week. And at Hazelden Betty Ford, you also can have there's all sorts of mental health care options and family services that you can also access. So what I want to start out by saying is the 30-day program is a relic, at least for the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. There's a movie called 28 Days, but that is not really what rehab is. In fact, I hate the word rehab because, for a variety of reasons, but it conjures up that image of a 28-day thing, and then you leave and you're magically supposed to be better. um, the truth is, those initial days are really about stabilizing and initiating recovery, a process. And that process is a lengthy one. Again, a lot of people will have multiple attempts. They'll try on their own. They'll maybe see a therapist, or maybe they'll go to AA on their own. And some people will start at residential care. It's just a wide variety of things that people pursue. But at our organization, if you get into the system and you start in residential care, what's most likely going to happen is that you will stay there for in that level of care for maybe 20 days on average, but that varies.
Okay, yeah,
And
very.
then you will step down, and this is all based on well, I'll get to that next because that was a separate question you asked. But then you would step down, so to speak, to the next level of care, which might be day treatment and recovery housing. So you might live, uh, it may feel kind of the same as residential, but you are not technically in treatment after, basic work hours or before basic work hours. You're just living wherever you're living, whether that's at home, in a sober home, or in a recovery residence that's on our own campus. And then you'd go to IOP. So we have people that will stay engaged in our care for like 2 years, or a year, sometimes up to 2 years, and just decreasing levels of intensity.
Okay.
So you might go from residential, then you're in day treatment, and then you'll go to intensive outpatient, and now you're living at home. You're getting acquainted with the recovery community. You're going to meetings, and then just the frequency of those declines. So you're in outpatient care, and by the end of a year, or this is ideal if you can stay engaged that long. Not everybody does, but that's ideal, and it does happen a lot more often than people realize. And you might be getting mental health care, seeing a therapist through that entire period. And your family may be engaged in services. Again, this is all ideal. You might be engaged with a recovery coach. We provide recovery coaching, so that's somebody that sort of coaches you on an ongoing basis. And so what it really is, instead of a 30-day sort of rigid cookie cutter model, it's now much more individualized to people's needs, to people's circumstances, etc.
How kind of like you made the analogy to cancer. I mean, a lot of people get chemo, radiation, but it's very, very, very individualized. So how do people pay? Is this out of pocket? Does insurance pay? Or
I know like there's NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Health, and they're a nonprofit and all their services are free, but rehab's generally how is this funded, and how is it a sliding scale, or how does one pay for this?
Well, we're a care provider. NAMI is a professional association,
Oh,
and we are a nonprofit, and we do collaborate with private insurance. So about 95% of our patients utilize their private insurance
okay. All right.
access care. We also, and what nonprofit really means, we still have to make money, uh,
Yes. Well,
and
you got to
to
hire everybody to be there, pay.
well, to grow, to innovate, to keep up with inflation, which has been through the roof, especially in healthcare the last 4 years. So you need to make money to be able to do that, but we're not beholden to shareholders or owners. They don't get the money. The money goes back into the business to further the mission. So we're beholden to the mission, not to owners, and that's a good place to be in for this kind of care, in my opinion. But we also get we benefit from very generous donors
Nice.
uh,
Right.
who donate. Most of who have a connection, either their organization or them individually to our mission or to the broader cause, and see us as making a difference. So they'll help fund innovative projects, building expansions, that sort of stuff. And we also have patient aid, which was a specific question I think you asked. So
Okay.
last year we had like $5 million in patient aid that helped about 3,100 people with their care. Now we put our patient aid to, rather than funding like um, 400 people to get the entire treatment experience that they need, we use it primarily to help people cover their housing costs as they go down the to lower intensity levels of care, because insurance doesn't, when you get to the day treatment level of care, that second most intense, insurance doesn't cover the your housing.
Oh,
But a lot of people still need sober housing or want to remain in recovery residence. So that's what our patient aid goes to, and it went to over 3,100 people last year. um,
my older brother, I mean, it was back in the 80s, and his work paid for rehab twice. He was working for PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, but I know that he did this twice in a course of a few years, like an inpatient kind of thing. But it was, I it's been so long, but I think it was 25 or 30,000. So insurance covered it, thankfully. Let's talk recovery and the journey, and your journey a little bit, and unless it's too personal, but I'd love to hear about, like, yeah, this after you've done some treatment, and what's the recovery process like for someone who's never experienced it, right? Because I grew up very Mormon, and we, not that I mean, we grow up like with, there's a set of scriptures, and that teach us your body is your temple. So most, like, you won't ever go to like a Mormon function, like a wedding even, and most likely there's not going to be alcohol there. It's just, we're just taught that. So but I have three other siblings, and so we were all brought up this way, and two struggled very much with substance abuse and two didn't. So but it wasn't in my wheelhouse or my experience. So it's very interesting to learn about, and we'd love to hear your journey and what the recovery process is like. And I have friends that have been clean and sober for 30-40 years, and periodically they still go to meetings and work programs. So it's been very interesting to hear them, when they're traveling. Or I'd love to hear, let's talk recovery.
yeah, thank you for the question. This is what I like to talk about the most, not myself, but about recovery more
Yeah.
broadly. But I will share about my personal story, because I think it's important for people to see faces and voices of people who are in recovery. So, uh, without getting into too many details, I grew up, went to college. I really started drinking. I really shunned alcohol in high school. I didn't want anything to do with it. There was some of it in my family, and I think I just didn't have a good taste in my mouth about what drinking and marijuana and the drug use was really all about. I didn't want to be in that scene, but of course, I eventually tried it, and I'm one of those people that sort of it worked for me pretty quickly, in terms of helping me with how I felt in social situations and with people. And so I escalated pretty quickly in college. Was a successful college student, but I was a musician and a journalist. I was, studying journalism, two professions, music and journalism, that really do romanticize alcohol use in movies and historically. And I did too. I mean, I really, and so my use escalated and, was a big part of my identity through college. And then it didn't, for a lot of people, it sort of ends or ebbs after college. But for me, it just didn't. It continued to escalate and become part of my life. It really harmed my marriage. I was married right out of college to my high school sweetheart, and alcohol was sort of in the middle of that the entire time. We had a short-lived marriage, 2 years, and you just fast forward several years of that escalation happening. I still had a job. I still had a lot of stuff that was working for me in my life, but also had some quiet discontent, and eventually got to the point where my girlfriend, 17 years ago, kicked me out of the house. And so I was, and I was sort of drinking at times and in places I shouldn't, and betraying my values on a routine basis, and just really escaping life. And it spiraled at the end real quickly, especially I think the not having a home for a few weeks. I was living out of hotels, and I woke up on a Monday morning, 10 o'clock, September 25th, 2006. And I'd been at a rehearsal with a band the night before. I remembered going to the bar by myself afterwards, and that was about it. I didn't remember anything of what happened. There was like pizza on the bed in the hotel room. The door was open, but I had just and I was late for work, and I was just so I was so frustrated and angry in that moment. I just woke up and was so mad at myself. How did this happen again? And
How old were you at the time? Can I?
33.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just started crying. And sometimes we never know why or when these moments come, but for me, I just broke down that morning, and I called a social worker friend. And who knows, if I hadn't done that right away or had waited even till the afternoon, maybe my history would be a little different. But I called a social worker friend and said, "Hey, man, I need help." And he said he would make some calls and get back to me shortly. And then he called and said, "Hey, they got a bed for you down at this place called New Life Treatment Center in Woodstock, Minnesota," which was kind of an ironic name for a musician. I was kind of if I was going to go someplace, Woodstock sounded okay. But
Is it still around, this treatment center that you went to?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just a little. It's based on the Hazelden model.
Okay.
But it's still there, very small though. And anyway, I called my girlfriend. I told her where I was going. I hadn't been seeing her because she kicked me out of the house for good reason. I called my boss in tears and said I was going to be gone for a while. I don't, who knows why I had the thought to do all this. I called the band leader to say I'm going to miss the show. I called everybody who would need to know that I'm gone, what I was doing. And I was just open about it because I was just distraught and desperate. And I always sort of knew that I was going to reach that point. This is the weird thing for me. I had this sense that I was moving toward an inevitability, but change is hard, man. Change for anybody, for any reason, change is hard. And you've the fear of the unknown. When your identity is really wrapped up in something like it can be with substance use and your friends and all that. So, but I had this sense I would always get there, and for whatever reason, that was the morning. And I got the treatment that day. My friend drove me, and on the way, he said, "Your life's never going to be the same again, don't you?" And I was still hungover, so it seemed awfully dramatic to me. Life will never be the same. but I'll never forget that line, of all the things that were shared on that trip. That's the one thing I remember him saying, because it turned out to be true. And as my recovery began, I started to get this sense that, oh yeah, this is a new way of being on the planet. Um, and that's how it started for me. I was a sort of a rare one that I did not. That was like a 30-day stay for me,
Okay.
and I went to aftercare for a little bit, and then I went to meetings for a little bit, and um, and then I had some other paths of recovery that were helpful to me, but I never did relapse or return to use. Um,
Wow.
well, I also had a lot of privilege. I had a supportive family. I had a job that paid for my treatment.
Okay.
I even got paid like half my salary while I was in treatment. I had
Wow. I've never heard of that. That's great.
I had a lot of stuff working for me that a lot of other people don't have. We call it recovery capital, things that are
Huh.
the internal and external influences on recovery. I had a lot going for me.
Is that company that you worked for still around? I would just love to give them a shout out. I mean, just the fact that they covered that half your salary. I have never heard of that, and I don't know if that's common. I can't imagine it is, because I probably would have heard about it. Is that company still around?
Yeah, it's the Schwann Food Company. It's a large frozen food company. I worked in training and development.
Just want to give them a shout out. That's great. Their human resource department for providing that service. So here you are 17 years later. Do you still go to meetings and or work any kind of a program, or is it ever still a temptation, or no? I always love to ask people that. Are there moments like when something really sad happens, the death of a loved one, or that those kinds of things, or the state of the current world? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I did. My mother overdosed in 2015 on opioids, so I have experienced, pretty.
Sorry.
No, no, it's a. I guess it's part of what motivates me. I've got the one side of the story, which is how amazing recovery can be and transformative, but I also know what the stakes when people don't um, get the care they need and the support they need and aren't able to find recovery for whatever reason. But that was the most difficult thing I've ever endured in my entire life, is to lose your mom, especially to addiction. When I was just getting involved with advocacy with Hazel and Betty Ford, and but I was never tempted, and I have not really been tempted to use substances this whole time. But you struggle with everything. This is all part of the human condition. So exercise was a huge part of my recovery for about 5 or 6 years. I did triathlons and marathons,
Oh, good.
and was a real driving factor for me to get into this field, as I wanted to help other people find not just recovery, but these other, like, wellness within recovery, and be able to thrive, just not survive, you know, not just survive addiction, but thrive in life. And um, but the reality is we all struggle. Like, life doesn't, it's not like perfect in recovery. Obviously, it's just life. And now you get to experience all the ups and downs, all the adventures, and you have sort of ways of navigating all that you didn't have before. Now, I imagine there are things that could happen where I could get in positions where I might, look to that as a solution. Hopefully not, and hopefully I've got enough protective stuff around me. I don't think about it ever. I'm not. I don't feel like I'm walking on a tightrope or anything like that. But I have wisdom, and the wisdom I have is that I'm a human being, and that happens to people sometimes. And so it's taking care of yourself to be, spiritually healthy. And I started talking about my fitness because that's something that's really left, or not left, but is not a big part of my life today. I've got 10-year-old twins
Oh,
that
how nice.
they are the miracle of my recovery. I hated kids when I was after.
Well,
I was really cynical about it. Told my friends that had kids that they were selfish and they were just like glorified pets, and I was just an idiot.
glorified pet. So
Uh, but so for me to make a decision, a conscious decision with my wife in recovery to have a kid, and then get two, was really epitomized the transformation that I underwent. Not like I instantly wanted kids, but your perspective on life changes in recovery, and you, you look at things in different ways. And in this case, think beautiful ways. I wanted the adventure of being a parent. Like I didn't want to leave the earth without having experienced that. Not that everybody needs to, but for me, I was able to just think about life, and it's just an example of me experiencing life in different ways. um, but since my kids have been born, that life of fitness and
huh.
exercise is left me, and
Oh
I've
no.
really
Oh
struggled. I've really struggled, and not unique to me, I know, but so I struggle with food sometimes, and there's still stuff with relationship. We all struggle. We're human beings, so it's not always substances that in recovery we're worried about. Like in recovery, we're trying to thrive as people, and so even when substances aren't the issue, we still have to navigate all the other things in life, and your recovery community and network is part of that, because that's the goal of when you go to an AA meeting or any sort of recovery support meeting. I don't know how much you talk about drugs or alcohol. You talk about life.
I do think fitness and is a huge part of someone's mental health, and I just mind, body, spirit. I'm such an advocate of that. When you got married, was it important to you to have somebody like who's clean and sober, or could you be with somebody? Does your wife drink, or was it important to you to say, I really need someone that's clean living as well, so it's not, this isn't as much of an issue? And like, do you just try to stay away from substance alcohol altogether, or can you be around it? Well, actually, I don't even know if that was your drug of choice, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, alcohol and pills were my drug of choice, substances of no choice, I should say. Um, the I didn't have to make that decision because my wife stopped drinking when I got sober. We weren't married at the time, but my girlfriend at the time stopped drinking when I got sober. We got
Right.
married years later, and I think it was a healthy thing for her, as much as it was an expression of solidarity or support. It was a little of both, I think.
Good.
Uh,
Good.
and so I don't know, but I do not mind. Like I have tons of family members that drinking, family members, friends.
So if you're at a holiday gathering, it's not a problem if everyone's drinking around you. You don't, take a sniff and I miss
No,
that. Not really.
no, I don't get tempted, but I do think we need to decentralize alcohol in our culture, especially around our social culture. And you described in your faith that you just don't see alcohol at a lot of the social events. Well, that's the opposite of American culture writ large, where alcohol is part and parcel of everything we do, and that is just corporate. We've been, whether it's food or alcohol or marijuana, anything that corporate America gets its grips on, they're going to manipulate us to use more, and they're going to make their profits off people who use the most. So in the alcohol industry, for example, 80% of the profits are made off people like me, the 20% who drink the most. It's the profits are made off of people with addiction. And
Oh, isn't that gut wrench? That's pretty gut wrenching to hear.
and so a big part of my advocacy is just we need to be educated as people about these forces in our culture and in our society, so that we can make good decisions and not just be uh, slaves essentially to corporations, which is something to be worried about. But no, I don't mind personally being around social functions, but I have friends in recovery who want nothing to do with being at a bar or a concert. But this is also, or want family gatherings to be more respectful, to have like non-alcoholic things
Yeah.
even
Options. Yeah.
other than water. Even like I went to a concert a week ago, and when all you can get is water and Diet Coke, that's not really inclusive of people who don't drink. And frankly, half of the population barely drinks or doesn't drink. Half of adults drink on average one drink or less a week. And yet all of our social constructs are designed around selling alcohol. And I think we're leaving a lot of people out. It's not inclusive. And so, we need more non-alcoholic options that are elevated in these social spaces. We need more alcohol-free social spaces. We just need to decentralize the role of alcohol and now marijuana and tobacco and all the other stuff that can harm people. We need to decentralize that in our culture and social spaces.
Yeah, that's become a hot topic here in California because it was legalized for recreational. But what's become a real problem is that these edibles that everybody has now, or the people, they look like regular snacks and candy. So like just this morning, headlines, there were like 4 kids that were hospitalized. They get into their parents' goodies, and because they look like normal cookies, and they eat the whole bag, and then they end up in the ER. So actually, there was some legislation. Our governor vetoed it last week. People are trying to, they don't want them to look like regular snacks because but it's become an issue. So, and I have read, and I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, and so there is a trend. It's a double-edged sword. So the younger generation, stats are showing that they are not drinking as much. And I don't know if it's just economics because booze is too expensive. They're not drinking as much. And there are some of these non-alcoholic bars that you mentioned popping up around the country. And but sadly, they're also getting into the pills and the fentanyl. So they're not drinking as much, but far more of that's the age group that's overdosing on the fentanyls and things like that. But I am happy to see
they're also vaping more and using more marijuana and using psychedelics more.
Oh yeah, that's right, the psychedelics. Oh yeah, I'm not a fan.
We can make judgments about what are more or less harmful, but this is a pattern throughout history of sort of swings from this drug to that drug. And what's constant is substance use disorder. Is a risk for every human being. All of us have different risk profiles. I should let your audience know that the 2 biggest risk factors that we know about anyway are family history of addiction and age of first use. So the earlier you first use mood and mind altering substances, the more likely you are to develop a substance use disorder in your lifetime. And the longer you wait, the less risk you have for developing a substance use disorder at some point in your lifetime. And it's very common to get a substance use. I mean, 1 in 7 people experiences a substance use disorder at some point in their life. 1 in 3 families is directly affected. It's stigmatized sort of in the shadows, but it's kind of crazy that it is because it affects so many people. And so, though we sort of switch and we will demonize this drug, then we'll demonize that drug, and then we'll shift policies and resources. But the one thing that stays constant is substance use disorder. It's always a risk, regardless of the substances that are sort of dominating today. Now, today, there's no doubt about it, fentanyl has created the most poisonous drug supply in American history. And if you're somebody in treatment and of the, familiar with the recovery community, almost everybody in recovery now has multiple friends who've overdosed and died from fentanyl.
Pretty gut wrenching.
If they're living in the world today. So it's a little bit of a Russian roulette situation with pills you buy on the street or off the internet or wherever you get drugs. And it's really concerning. So we do need policies that are specific to overdoses. But I also just bring it up because I think, we're too focused on this drug or that drug. It's like if you want to attack obesity and you focused on Big Macs.
Oh,
and at the exclusion of everything else. And then the next thing is it's, Taco Tuesday. I'm going to address Taco Tuesday when the fundamental thing is a health condition and a risk for a health condition that is sort of independent of that. Maybe Big Macs are more harmful than Taco Tuesday, but they're all sort of part of the same.
Well, then if this is too personal, I mean, or I'd love to hear your thoughts, but we can also edit it if you don't want it in the interview. Since you're the father of two 10 years old twins, and I don't know what the laws are in Minnesota. So, and with your experience and working for the Hazelden Betty Ford, would you be supportive of these policies then that are legalizing marijuana for recreational, or highly against it? They're trying to, say it's harmless. It is kind of, I used to live in Hawaii, and Hawaii is even, they have, most of their Congress is Democrat. I don't even know if there's one Republican in office, but it's and when I lived there, people smoke. I had never been around people who smoke pot all day long, like rolled out of bed and hit a bong until the time they went to bed. But even with that, and they smoke a lot of, they call it pakalolo, they have not legalized it, and they're not even close to legalizing it like California. So do you think these are bad policies that are legalizing it for recreational, or if that's just too, we don't have to talk about it if it's too off course or too.
No, I think drug policy is complex, and there's the history of criminalizing addiction
Oh yeah.
has wrought a lot of problems and has been um, inequitably impacted different populations, and so it's very understandable that we would re-examine um, policies about what's legal, what's not legal, and and with alcohol, it's obviously way, the horse has been out of the barn for decades and decades and decades. You will never really change access to alcohol policies
Yeah.
moving forward, probably because it's so central to our culture. Marijuana was a little different. It wasn't where alcohol was, and so I think where I personally landed was we should definitely decriminalize it. You shouldn't go to jail for simply using um, marijuana. But that doesn't mean legalization is the answer either, where you essentially greenlight a for-profit industry with boards now meeting around the clock, asking themselves the question, how can we get more people to use marijuana? And how can we get people who use marijuana to use more? I mean, that's exactly the conversation happening in boardrooms. Because once there's a for-profit industry, that's how industry works, and I think uh, there will be significant public health consequences of that. Regardless if that's the right policy or not, I think that's what we need to be aware of. It's going to have public health consequences. For example, there's corporations that are very intentionally deciding to create edibles that look like candy. There's a cannabis 2 doors down from my house here in Minnesota, because we just legalized marijuana here. That looks like a carnival machine. So if you're my 10-year-old kids and you're walking out, like, what is that? That looks fun.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing here in California. Why, and the kids, there's an ER doctor I follow on LinkedIn, and I mean, it's just been like night and day. The kids ending up in the ER because.
I'm also concerned that it all really started with the portrayal of marijuana as medicine.
Yeah, yeah.
Where states basically, instead of the FDA, the normal way of getting medicines approved, states just decided, hey, we're going to say what's medicine now. So you've like introduced this weird situation. I don't really want to express a specific view because it's so complex. There are problems with the federal government having a different policy than all these states, and the remedy to that, I'm not exactly sure what that is at this point. But there was a ruse, affected over several decades now, that portrayed marijuana as being a cure-all, that portrayed it as being harmless. I mean, we hear it from kids that we treat. They actually get made fun of when marijuana may be destroying their life, and they'll get made fun of from other kids that don't think it's possible they could be addicted to marijuana. when it very clearly is. And so, you know, we've known this for decades, that marijuana is, you know, carries a risk for a cannabis use disorder, just like any other mood and mind altering substance. It's concerning that the perceptions of harm, of it being risky have declined as much as they have, and so that people don't really have a realistic, well-rounded perception of, you know, what the risk may be. And everybody's different. A lot of people who use marijuana will have no problems, just like a lot of people who use alcohol have no problems.
Right.
There are people that use heroin and cocaine and have no problems. But there are people that, like me, who do use and we experience problems. It's a significant minority. As I said, it's not everybody, but it's fairly common to experience substance use disorders. So what I'm concerned about is that we don't have a full recognition of the public health impact, and therefore aren't investing in the public health, won't invest accordingly in the public health impacts. And that we're not, you know, even the fact that there's, you know, I don't think there should be cannabis billboards. I don't think that there should be, you know, all these impressions of, just like alcohol, same way. We really should have regulations that limit the ability for corporations to indoctrinate this as a healthy, fun, risk-free, everyday part of life. That doesn't mean, again, throwing anybody in jail for it,
Yeah.
or even making.
Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. My thoughts are definitely aligned with yours. Like, I don't want to see marijuana be a Schedule I drug up there with heroin and meth, but I definitely think it's not harmless. And I'm, you know, the developmental, when kids' brains are still developing until they're in, you know, mid-20s, and the more I've been developing this show, I've seen a lot of research too that for a small percentage, like definitely not the masses, but there's, you know, they can get symptoms that present like schizophrenia. So if you have, you know, a genetic risk already or a tendency, you know, it could exacerbate that. So you know, that's kind of a scary thought, to think that people could, like you said, think it's just completely harmless in a developing brain, and where we are seeing there's research to show otherwise. Thank you for your input on that.
And of course, you know, that's what we see. You know, 3 miles from my front door here, we have a National Center for Teens, Young Adults, and Families, and we frequently see people there with psychosis, marijuana-induced psychosis. So, you know, not everybody sees that. We do, and we have for years, and it's gotten worse as, you know, marijuana is increasing potency. So. Again, is it the end of the world? No. Do I think that we need to be fully aware of the public health implications? Do I think that we need to, you know, really help people understand that there's help available if they start to experience issues with it, and help people understand that, you know, marijuana is what's actually causing your anxiety in some cases, not what's alleviating your anxiety. Just more well-rounded public education around it. I think it will come with time, hopefully. But right now, there's some distorted thinking around it, I think.
Well, you brought up a good point. It's just realistic that when boards get involved, when it becomes a for-profit model, everything changes. So ads are targeted, and it's. Do you have any parting thoughts or anything you'd like to, you know, mention that I forgot to bring up?
Well, first of all, it's been a nice freewheeling, all over the place conversation, which are my favorite kind. No, my parting word is, you know, I'm very privileged to be a person who's overcome addiction and in recovery, and to be part of a community that is more than 20 million across the country. There's more than 20 million people walking around the United States right now who have overcome a substance use disorder of one sort or another. It's not a small community, and a lot of people, you know, think that it's hopeless. Once an addict, always an addict. There's a lot of misconceptions about what addiction is and who it affects and who people affected by addiction are. And what I want to say is that recovery, this is like other health conditions. Only the prognosis for recovering from addiction, if you get proper care and support, it is actually better than most chronic health conditions, which is counter to, I think, the stigmatized view that some people have. And so that's my parting message is if there's families out there experiencing addiction or individuals experiencing addiction, that that's not the end of the story. It doesn't need to be the end of the story. It's not, recovery doesn't look the same for everybody and doesn't come about the same way for everybody. But what's common is it happens. Recovery happens a lot. And I'm lucky to be able to see it a lot. And, if, the first step is always asking for help. Like I did that morning in 2006, September 25th. I picked up the phone, I asked for help, and my life changed.
Thankfully you had a friend who cared and got, took the time to find a place, and it wasn't just lip service, like, oh, you'll get through it, really took an active role in getting you help. So, well, thank you so much, Jeremiah. I'm going to keep in touch, and feel free to reach out.
I appreciate your curiosity and just lifting up voices like mine and bringing important information to folks.
Well, it means a lot that you took the time, because I have several, we have a lot of addiction in my family, on my father's side, and I have a lot of friends here in LA and just all over but nobody really wanted to talk about it. And I have a couple patients. I've been a chiropractor, and I asked them, I know that they're actively very involved, and would you be willing to, no, that's the whole point. It's supposed to be anonymous. And, oh, okay. So it's hard to get people to talk about it. So thank you. Think about it so much, and have a great weekend, and I'll stay in touch.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings, where we talk about the brain and all things mental health. Hope to see you next week, and please share with your friends.